This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into SportsDay Insider presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my pal Evan Grant. We're going to have Joe Hoyt speak with us today as well. Joe has rejoined the SportsDay staff after a little hiatus, a couple other different places, and we're glad to have him back.
He was on the practice squad.
He's on the practice squad, yeah. He's going to talk to us about the Cowboys with us. We haven't talked about the Cowboys in a few weeks. I think there have been some people out there that are glad we weren't talking about the Cowboys. It's not that we didn't want to, it's just that there wasn't a lot to talk about. And there were other things that we needed to get into the podcast. We have a hard time wedging all this information into 45 minutes to an hour or whatever it is, however long this podcast takes to do. It's brimming with information, not sheen, information. So we bring you only
Something
the latest and the best, or the worst, whatever the case may be. That's what we're doing with local sports information. So anyway, Evan, let's see here. We had the 4th of July weekend. The lovely wife and I got away to the lake for a few days. Did you do anything for the 4th of July, Evan?
It was Gina's birthday. We had a little celebration here for her. Flew in her best friend from South Florida who surprised her. So pulled that off, and it was a nice weekend. But of course, Kevin, we'd be remiss. We didn't mention the horrible situation in Central Texas over the weekend. I think everybody in Dallas-Fort Worth seems to know somebody who has been affected by the flood situation, particularly at Camp Mystic, and it's just a terrible situation. Send your children away to camp where they're supposed to make memories of a lifetime, and to have to go through the kind of trauma that so many families have endured. Or I just want to say, I hate saying thoughts and prayers, but I really do mean it. I've thought a lot about those folks this weekend, and I hope that we find a couple of happier stories along the way.
Yeah, it's a terrible story. We, for probably 20 years, we went on a family reunion every year at Mo Ranch, which is also on the Guadalupe River and just right outside of Hunt. Largely unaffected by the tragedy that unspooled there. The sleeping quarters for those campers up there are far removed from the river, and elevated from the river. And so I think it was part of the reason why they were spared that. We did have one of the girls that danced with my girls over the years. She had a niece that she lost in that tragedy. So it was awful, and as you said, our thoughts and prayers are with them. That is the best we can do. Besides making donations, if you would find a place to make a donation, and there are lots of them, that would be great to help these people out that are undertaking this mammoth task of recovery as well as moving on. It's a terrible, terrible time in Texas. So, Evan, let's move over and talk a little bit about the Rangers, who aren't so good themselves these days. We have seen them kind of play lately like they have all year long. One step forward, two steps back. We're drawing close to the All-Star break here on Tuesday. They're going to close out the break with the Angels as we're taping this on Wednesday morning, and then go to Houston to play the Astros, which will really, I think, bring into focus what's going on with the Rangers more than anything. I mean, I think that, obviously fans have been paying attention all year long, but nothing does that more than playing the Astros. So we'll see at that point. So far, we've had one Ranger named to the All-Star team, Jacob deGrom. No surprise there. I would expect, though, there will be at least one more. But you're not surprised by the fact that they've been kind of left out, have you?
No, I'm not. Nathan Eovaldi's had a great first half, but he did miss a month. And as good as Nathan has pitched and as good as the ERA has been, I honestly think that the All-Star folks should maybe add a rule that says, especially on pitchers, if a player misses more than a month or misses 30 days, however you want to line it up, I think it's best for the player and the team if the All-Star committee or Major League Baseball in that regard basically said, we're not going to add any players like that to the All-Star team. Don't need to add any pitching stress on their to their workload. Don't need to put teams in bad situations. You can name them honorary All-Stars, but say, we're not going to ask you to participate. But in terms of the numbers, it basically took him out of all the qualifiers, and he's about 30 innings behind just about everybody else. And so I'm not surprised that he wasn't added to the team. I just think that while the ERA is great, I think there are other guys with more innings and comparable numbers that filled out the All-Star starting staff. As far as the other guys go, the other thing I'd consider if I was Major League Baseball is asking the Players Association on the reserve list when they vote on reserves and pitchers to add a utility player, because Josh Smith has had a great year as a utility player, but his numbers at any one position don't stack up with the top two. And he's probably been the best utility player in the American League and an everyday player. But at any singular position, there have been two guys who stood above him. So maybe that's something, it used to be when they had that final vote a few years ago, which turned into nothing more than team marketing opportunities. There were a number of guys who were kind of like super subs, super utility guys who were on that ballot. And I'd like to see a way for Major League Baseball to reward versatility in the All-Star game, but I think it would have to come in the way of asking players to vote for a utility guy. And the last guy who's had a really good first half, had a rough night the other night, is Hobie Milner. But let's face facts. The way the pitching staff is going to be constructed, it's going to be a bunch of starters and a bunch of closers. There's not room in there for middle relievers or kind of situational guys, so to speak. So the Rangers got four guys with good cases. They had one guy who, you couldn't deny putting him on the All-Star team. It'll still be a surprise to me if Jacob deGrom ends up pitching. I think with his workload and with the Rangers' needs, it wouldn't surprise me if Jacob goes and participates but doesn't end up pitching. Just because I think same thing that I've just talked about. I mean, this team has real needs right now, and Jacob's also working into kind of uncharted territory based on the last 5 years. So it won't surprise me if the Rangers don't have anybody actually participate in the game.
Evan, off the top of your head, can you remember a time when that happened where no Ranger played in the game?
No, I'd have to look up in the media guide if they're the last time, and I haven't even thought about that to this point. That's a great point.
Well, while you're looking that up, let me just kind of go over a couple of things here. So I think it says everything about the Rangers' first half, that there was nobody that anybody could really make a case for. There were no snubs on this team. No, you couldn't say, well, boy, you make the case for Josh Smith, and yes, he's a very good utility player, and I think, frankly, the Rangers need more guys like Josh Smith, more guys with his approach. That he's not a slugger. Obviously, he has to really crank it up to pull the ball down the right field line, and he has made himself into a guy who has a little bit of pop occasionally, which is really, really good and really unusual for a guy to do that after he's already into his major league career. But basically, what he is a really nice player, and that's not an all-star. And the Rangers, the problem has been this year, as we've talked about, ad nauseum, is that too much guys trying to slug or that's their MO anyway, and not enough guys who can, draw a walk, see some pitches, make the other team make some mistakes. And that's what they did against the Angels on Tuesday night. And they drew 9 walks in that game and won in kind of a rout. And, it's funny. It has to be one of those things here. And so, I don't want to say, well, just frustrating for a guy like Brett Boone who comes on and the rest of the hitting instructors and the staff there to say, only the Rockies chase more than you guys, and the Rockies are terrible. And what does that say? To me, I know you want to identify pitches that you want to swing at. You don't want to just be taking for the just because we're going to take pitches now. That's ridiculous. No major league hitter does that. But you just have to be more selective about what you're willing to go for. And at times it just seems like these guys are just chasing anything. Case in point, we know that about Adolis Garcia. That's been a case throughout his career. But it's really ramped up in the case of Josh Young, who's now in Round Rock.
And Jake Berger. I mean, Jake Berger had a nice night on Tuesday night, but I believe he's got 8 walks this year. And that's not acceptable if you're not an absolute beast in terms of batting average. You have got to reach base more. I think going into last night's game, into Tuesday's game, he had a 257 on base percentage, and that's just not, it's just not acceptable. And listen, the Rangers, in constructing a team, it seemed like the Rangers put the highest priority on guys who could hit the fastball and slug this year. And with it, they didn't, and it's almost unfair to say this, that they didn't add guys who were selective, because Jock Peterson has always been a selective hitter. He got off to an awful start, but it's just that weakness has really showed up, and they are, to your point, Kevin, they chase more than anybody. And the reason they drew 9 walks yesterday is because, Soriano, or on Tuesday, I should say, they drew 9 walks because Soriano was nowhere near the plate. His pitches were just completely erratic, and they weren't a strike at any point in time, in terms of a player's line of vision. But anybody who's got any kind of command, they can get the Rangers to swing at balls outside of the zone, and that has been this team's biggest offensive problem this year.
Yeah, and we just mentioned Josh Young in particular. To watch him swing at that ball up and in is just amazing to me. It's like that's the last pitch any hitter should be swinging at. First of all, you're putting yourself in harm's way with it, and that's what happened to him. But even if you make contact on that pitch, what is it going to do? It's going to be off the handle. There's no way you could get the barrel around on that ball, especially if a fastball, a 98-mile-an-hour fastball. And so the idea that he can't lay off that pitch has to be something that's, frustrating for everybody on the club. But I'm wondering, Evan, do you think that part of the problem?
Kevin, I'm going to interrupt you for a second, because it also basically cost him a year. It cost him all of 2024 because he tried to swing at a ball that was up and in, and left his wrist exposed, and he ended up with a fractured wrist on a ball he swung at.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That's the whole point. Plus, there's just all kinds of things that can happen with that. If a ball tails off from a right-handed pitcher and he is leaning into that and swinging, that ball could hit him in the face. There is just no reason in the world to swing at that pitch. It's a little bit like Adolis, and we know Adolis chases anything up. It's the same thing with all those guys. They can't hit it. They can't lay off it. As you pointed out before, it's like the line from A League of Their Own. And so, do you also, though, get a sense, Evan, that Josh has been resistant to what the Rangers have wanted him to do?
Kevin, it's hard for me to properly articulate this, because the longer I've covered baseball, the more it's sunk into me that great players have a certain amount of stubbornness to them. They know themselves. They know what they can do. And even when people are suggesting, no, change this, they believe in themselves. And stubbornness is an asset. And I kind of learned this with Kenny Rogers. Stubbornness is an asset until it becomes a detriment. And I think this is what the case has become with Josh Young. Why he swung at this pitch and insistently swung on this pitch, and I think believes that he can get to this pitch, that's the thing I'd like to get to. He's not been able to really give me an explanation for that. If I'm coming up with a theory, it's this: that when he was drafted, there was so much talk about, he didn't have power to the pull side, And I don't know if subconsciously he got it into his head that I've got to be able to pull balls in. That's how I can hit for power, is if I can pull balls inside. He's got plenty of power the opposite way. He doesn't need to pull those pitches that are that are too far inside for power. And I don't know if Josh is a great study when it comes to player psychology and peak performance. I don't know if that's something he's got to address with somebody, but that's, to me, the oversimplified version of maybe what's happened here, is that he's trying to overcompensate and has just created a mental block in his head that he has got to get to that pitch.
Yeah, and I think the key thing you said there, though, Evan, is that great players are stubborn. Josh Young is not a great player right now. He's not even a good player right now. He's trending the wrong direction from where the promise he showed in his rookie season when he was an all-star. And so he really kind of has to have a come to Jesus moment here and realize where he is in his career and try to do whatever it takes to get him back on the right track, because they simply can't afford for him to have this kind of regression. He's one of the, he was the first of their position players to come up and really, there were guys that, like Joey Gallo, who was good for a couple of seasons, but Joey kind of went back and forth a lot. There was a lot of feeling that, okay, they've got the third base position, fixed for the next 10 years, right?
Yeah.
And then and now this has happened.
Well, and I think your use of the word regression is important, and I think it brings us to what should be our final point on the Rangers today, and that is, what do you do with this team going forward? And let me try and sum this up as quickly as I can. I would, from my perspective, for the remainder of the 2025 season, I think I would let this team as it is play out. I don't think that you're going to get value for anybody that you would try and trade unless you were to make a blockbuster deal with a Jacob deGrom or a Nathan Eovaldi. And it's been very clear that Chris Young has no desire to trade those guys. All that said, unless they have a big comeback, unless they get hot, and, the wild card certainly hasn't run away from them, unless they get hot, I think the Rangers have a lot of decisions to make, because you look around the field right now and they traded for Jake Berger, and his numbers have not been acceptable, and he's going to arbitration next year. Marcus Semien is going to be 35 in September. They've got questions at third base about Josh Young and whether or not they should try Josh Smith every day at third base. They're going to be looking for a new right fielder in Adolis Garcia. Evan Carter has played well, but there are always going to be long-term issues about his health. Wyatt Langford had a nice night on Tuesday, but he's gone through something of a sophomore slump here. I think that's fair to say. And at catcher, they've got to start fresh at catcher. Jonah Heim is going to be in a second year or third year of arbitration, and he has not performed adequately. So they're going to have some real long-term decisions about the direction of this franchise. And I think that what you said about regression is the reason why. This team is looking more and more like a fluke World Series winner that will have had 2 consecutive losing seasons before they won the World Series, and right now are on pace for 2 more consecutive seasons after they've lost after they won the World Series. That's one winning season in a 5-year period. That, to me, I don't know exactly how you define fluke as a champion, but that to me would kind of sum it up.
Well, it does, and there's no question about it. It doesn't diminish the fact that they won a World Series. I mean, that's a hard thing to do over 162 games, and then the postseason, and to do what they did it, and so and Rangers fans can always cherish that. But there's no question that guys had career years, and then they're just everything dovetailed perfectly in a perfect storm of greatness for all the guys involved. I will say this to your point about the All-Star game, and we are going to get out right after this point, is that I think I'd dangle Adolis Garcia out there, and if anybody gave me something I really liked, I think I'd take a shot at that. They don't really have. The problem is that are you ready just to hand right field to Alejandro Osuna? I don't know that I am. I don't know that he's shown me enough at this point to make me believe that he can do that. I don't think he's really a right fielder for that point. He just feels like more of a left fielder, center fielder to me than a right fielder. Doesn't mean he can't play the position, but I guess I've just gotten used to Adolis's play out there this year, and it's been excellent, at least defensively. So, but you're right. I don't think that there's enough to be gained from trades, and what if they did get hot and were able to get into the postseason this year? And I don't think they'd go very far, but at least it would be more fun than watching this team just fade away like it did last year.
Well, right. And I would say that for me, the second half project needs to be digging into this wholesale regression, because basically this entire team, newcomers and holdovers, everybody regresses, and they need to figure that out. They need to figure out what's going on and why players have regressed offensively. It hasn't happened with the pitching staff. It hasn't happened with the bullpen, but it has offensively, and that's something the Rangers need to dig in and figure out for the long term.
No question about that. All right, that's going to do it for the Rangers segment of our podcast. We're going to move over now and talk to our pal Joe Hoyt. First of all, welcome him officially back to the fold. Joe, we know you lost your way there for a while, and we're just glad that you, I don't know, not that you came to your senses. We were all sad to see you go, but now you're back, and it's all great. It's all good, right?
Yeah, no, I went away into the desert for 40 days and, or 2 years, depending on how you look at it, and had to come back home. And, I'm thrilled to be back. This was always the dream once I interned in 2016, was to kind of get to this point, and to be in this role I'm humbled, I'm honored, excited, motivated, and ready to go, ready for Oxnard.
Cool.
Let's just sum this all up very quickly. Okay. Joe worked with me.
And that drove him out of the paper.
Drove him out of the morning news.
Yeah.
And then he decided he wanted to cover the Cowboys. So he went to the practice squad, spent 2 seasons on the practice squad, and now he is ready to move into, what did you play in high school?
I was a strong safety. So
moving into the secondary with the Cowboys.
There you go.
There you go. I was just, you mentioned it, talked about the fluke World Series there, and I thought I was the reason the whole time, because when I covered the Rangers with Evan, they were terrible. They, were kind of lost in their ways too. I go off the beat, and then the next year they win the World Series. So I was starting to have a complex that I was the reason, the good luck Chuck of sports reporting, I guess. But hey, it seems a little fluky or lightning in a bottle, depending on how you look at it.
That's all right. That's okay. Well, Evan, you're back. I mean, Evan's back. He's covering the Rangers this week after Sean.
Yeah, Kevin, just keep mumbling about me being back. Whatever. Go ahead. Let's talk about the Cowboys.
You're back covering the team. Finally, going to cover it and cover the Astros this weekend. Rangers Astros. Joe, you hit the ground running here, and you had a story in Wednesday's paper of the Dallas Morning News talking about the relationship developing between George Pickens, a new acquisition from the Steelers, the wide receiver, to join with CD Lamb, and obviously Dak Prescott. So, and Dak had his getaway, and they go to Georgia. Let me ask you this first, because what's in Georgia? Why did they go to Georgia for the getaway?
Yeah, there's kind of a group that they've worked in with before. I forget if it's OXS or OSX. I always get those two confused, but it's very kind of it's formatted. It's kind of, they've got some military kind of feel to it. It's a good chance for them to kind of work and get offline a little bit. And one thing Dak talked a lot about is this is a chance for them. Yeah, they get the chance to throw, and that's going to be pivotal too. But this is really a chance to get to know people too, and kind of figure out. There's a lot of new faces, in terms of Joe Milton being in the quarterback room, George Pickens. That's why I wanted to ask yesterday to Dak Prescott, what did you learn about the person that is George Pickens, considering all the pre-existing narratives we have about Pickens and heading into his final year, based on what things happened in Pittsburgh?
Let me ask you this too then about that. How many other teams do this sort of thing? Do you have any idea? Or are the Cowboys fairly unique in this and taking their quarterbacks and wide receivers, and it is basically a voluntary thing, right? This is not something that the Cowboys are asking these guys to do, right?
Yeah, completely voluntary. But Dak has been doing it now for a long time, and he was kind of a trendsetter with this. It's become more common. Like Sam Darnold, for example, and a bunch of the Seahawks guys were out there throwing. Even things like satellite camps, like Tight End University over with George Kittle, or even Tyron Smith had an O-line camp called the Big and the Beautiful out there in Las Vegas. Which is funny from an SEO standpoint right now. But, that was something they did out there too. So it's becoming more common, and it's kind of goes back to the point of, hey, we have this downtime, how can we take advantage of it while also still doing a little R&R? They went out to Lake Oswego, Oregon last year, spent a lot of time on the water out there too. So it's become a very central thing for a lot of, kind of relationships between quarterbacks and wide receivers, because it allows you to kind of get beyond and kind of get outside of the norm for a little bit too.
And really important this year, right? Because as you noted, the narrative about George Pickens coming here, that's the reason he's here is because the Steelers just said, okay, that's enough. We're tired of the tantrums during games. We're tired of being late to meetings and organizational activities. Mike Tomlin, who is already one of the most respected coaches in the league, just from his abilities, but also really respected for his ability to understand players, to reach players, to get along with players. He just said that George had to grow up a lot. Now, one of the things that came along as well was that I saw George get into it a little bit on social media with a fan who said, and he said basically, "Hey, that was an act. I was getting myself out of there, and they did what I wanted them to do." Did you get any idea that George might have finagled this thing for himself?
Yeah, when I asked him if he requested a trade, he said no. But he's on social media, to your point, has kind of indicated that maybe he was kind of ready to get out of there in Pittsburgh. And I think you kind of compare that to just the different person he's been here in Dallas so far. And again, granted, it's extremely early. We talk all the time about, your truest characters revealed through adversity. They have had no adversity so far. It's all kumbaya. Things are great. But, so far, George Pickens has been the perfect soldier with the Dallas Cowboys. I keep using the word that he's been programmed or reprogrammed, frankly, because when he talks with us, it's very short. He's not giving us anything. It's very simple. I remember in one press briefing we had with him, someone had mentioned, hey, there's a lot of speed on this offense, which was kind of funny. Because I don't really look at them as the most fast, like one of the more fast offenses in the NFL, especially in terms of what they have with Javonte Williams, Miles Sanders. And it's funny, the rest of the press briefing, Pickens like, yeah, I just love being here. I love the speed. Love the speed. So it's funny, once someone gave him something, that was the only thing he was going to give back to us too. He has done everything right so far. And I think that so far that's a testament to, change of scenery, makes things a little bit better. I also think his pre-existing relationship with CeeDee Lamb has been integral. And that's something that, Dak Prescott talked about immensely yesterday. Is just, he said that during this retreat, at some points he would leave the conversation, go walk inside, and he would just watch CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens and just kind of their interactions with each other. And he's like, man, these two are hitting it off. And he thinks that relationship is going to be good. In terms of the Cowboys, I think the two most pivotal X factors this year is Tyler Guyton at left tackle. Can he be a serviceable left tackle? I think if he can be a serviceable left tackle, that should be okay for the Cowboys in terms of what they could do and not limiting them. And I think George Pickens kind of staying this perfect soldier and kind of, not letting adversity get the best of him. I think that could be so big, not only for their passing game, but what they can do with the running game. but George Pickens is the most talented running mate CeeDee Lamb's ever had. And I know they had Amari Cooper his rookie season. George Pickens is a little bit different. And I think if they can get the player George Pickens and they can get a grown-up version of the person too, I mean, it could do a lot for them too.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna say this about George Pickens, and hopefully he's about to turn 25, right? I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's a lot. That's a coming of age period for a lot of people. But going back to his days as a high school recruit and then at Georgia, he's shown immaturity time and time again. He showed it for Kirby Smart, and he showed it for Mike Tomlin. And those are two of the most respected coaches in college and professional football. And I the one thing I am wary of is he hasn't run a route in a game, hasn't yet had to catch a pass that mattered. And it's good that he's gotten off to a good start here, but there is a long track record that I think he's going to have to erase, and he's probably going to face questions about that on more than one occasion, and he's going to have to keep up that good face, and that is where the real challenge will come.
Yeah, no doubt. I think, the first game that CeeDee Lamb gets 12 targets and he gets 2, I'm so curious just to see how he responds to that, because he has preached, hey, it's about the team, and I don't care, as long as things kind of work out with the team. But guess what? George Pickens is in a contract year. George Pickens has a pre-existing narrative about him. If George Pickens not only doesn't go out there and be the perfect soldier, as we've talked about, but then also doesn't perform, then he's not getting the payday that he wants. And, it kind of feels like, I wrote about this the other day, it feels like there's 2 paths this George Pickens situation goes down. And frankly, in terms of the future outlook for the Cowboys, it's not ideal, both of them, because either George Pickens, doesn't be the perfect soldier. Things go awry. Next thing you know, you're kind of done with him next year, and you're still looking for wide receiver 2 to go with CeeDee Lamb for the near future. They wanted to get Teteroa McMillan for this reason, so that they didn't have to worry about it, someone that they could have a running mate for a long time. Now, but the other option is, what if things go right? What if everything goes perfect, right? Well, the Cowboys cap situation next year doesn't dictate that a team that's going to be willing to keep George Pickens. They could franchise tag him, but in terms of the pre-existing narratives, hey, I think if you get a perfect George Pickens for a year and then you franchise tag him, I'm not sure that that's going to be the best for a guy who has shown immaturity, to your point, Evan. And the other thing, too, is we've seen it time and time again. Mike Tomlin is willing to take chances on receivers with immaturity issues. He's willing to try and get the most out of the player, but even that runs out at some point. And every receiver that's left him, aside from Antonio Brown, even that had a half-life to it, though, where, the immaturity kind of outweighed the playing ability eventually. It hasn't gone well. So George Pickens is going to try to buck a narrative here, buck a trend, and see what happens. And I think, in terms of the future outlook for the Cowboys, it's not great in terms of what's going to happen next year. The 2026 draft class is not a good wide receiver class. And if you're trying to find an affordable running mate for the Cowboys, after George Pickens, I don't think that there's going to be a lot of great options outside of another surprising trade.
Let's look at the talent involved here, because you brought up the point that he would be the most talented receiver that CD has played with, and I think you're right about that. Amari Cooper, the strength of Amari Cooper runs wonderful routes, always open, good hands, reliable hands, not great hands, but good enough hands, but certainly not an explosive player. George Pickens is an explosive player. This is the guy who makes terrific catches. If George Pickens had the personality of Amari Cooper, or if he had the personality of CeeDee Lamb, well, the Cowboys couldn't have gotten him for what they got for him, right? The Steelers wouldn't have traded him. He's got that kind of ability. So it does present something that the Cowboys haven't had. Now, the question for me has always been, when clearly CD is the number 1 wide receiver, you've committed to that with him. And as they have said, they're calling this 1A and 1B. It wasn't a great working relationship even when Amari was there. And Amari is about as low ego as you can possibly get. And yet he was a little miffed about how he was being used there toward the end. And that's one of the reasons why the Cowboys traded him. That's a difficult thing to negotiate. I kind of felt like, I know they wanted McMillan, as you said, and maybe he'd be fine in that kind of role, being the subordinate receiver to CeeDee Lamb. But it takes a certain personality to make that work. And I don't know if you can get that in the first round. A guy who's in the first round is expected to be, the guy, right? And so I do think this will be interesting how it works out. I think it'd be difficult for it to work out with a lot of people. It requires the right kind of guy who can step up and do what you want him to do, but also realize, hey, this is CeeDee Lamb's team. This is his room anyway.
Yeah, and that makes me think that it's funny because Brian Schottenheimer says, hey, we want to be a team that runs the ball and we want to emphasize that. Part of me thinks that they're just going to be an offense that centers around two electric wide receivers. And I think one good thing for the Cowboys in terms of this potential pairing, again, there's one football to go around, right? But these two, in terms of what they do best, are different, right? Like George Pickens is an excellent deep ball receiver. He is Michael Gallup, but more talented, right? In terms of what Michael Gallup did versus with CeeDee Lamb. He is a guy, he is the number one PFF guy downfield, over the last few years. His rookie season, he had the most contested catches in the NFL. Dak Prescott is an excellent deep ball thrower. And he talked about this yesterday. He doesn't think the rapport with him and George Pickens is going to take long because, hey, whether he's separating or not, I can just throw it up to him. That's something that Dak Prescott said yesterday. He's already thinking, hey, that guy could be my outside security blanket, someone that I can go to when things get tough. So I think in terms of what they're going to do offensively, I actually think too they're going to utilize them both a little bit as a 1A, 1B in terms of, hey, CeeDee Lamb might be outside at one point, and then Pickens is a big slot. And then next play, they might even switch it up a little bit, trying to kind of differentiate and kind of give multiple views to the defense. But I think that these two pair well together in terms of their difference of skills. That's why I keep going back to the McMillan thing. That was the dream with McMillan, because McMillan is not a guy that's going to separate across, on crossing routes. He's not a guy that's going to, pull people away. He's a dude that, hey, whether it's one guy or two in double coverage, we trust his spectacular catchability and his size and his ability to make, catches at the apex. That can play well if CeeDee Lamb is not open across the middle, right? And I think that that's something you're going to see a lot from the Cowboys this year. And it makes me think that they're going to push the ball downfield.
Yeah, I agree with that too. It's hard, when you don't really spend much at the running back position in the offseason. They made some additions there, but they didn't exhaust any great draft capital to get one. And they didn't do anything as far as in free agency to do that either. They added people, but I can't look at any one of those guys and say, oh, here's your guy. They seem determined to do a running back by committee approach here, and that doesn't usually work out very well for them, but we'll see how that goes. I'm intrigued by the other thing you brought up about Tyler Guyton, because there's no question that he was a disappointment last year at left tackle. And, they've done a really good job over the last 10 years or more in drafting offensive linemen in the first round, almost spectacularly well. I mean, they're talking about drafting at least one Hall of Famer, two Hall of Famers. I'm going to just say, both of those guys, Tyron Smith and Zach Martin, both are going to the Hall of Fame. And then you're draft, the guy that Tyler Smith that they drafted, how long ago has that been now? 3 years ago?
4 years ago, yeah.
He's on a track for that right now. He's playing really well. So that's what makes the Tyler Guyton thing look so bad in comparison with that, because, not only was he not doing a great job, he was getting flagged like every time you turned around. So there was a lot of speculation that, well, maybe they let Terrence Steele go because of his cap hit, and you move Tyler Guyton to right tackle, and you kick Tyler Smith from left guard out to left tackle, and then you replace the left guard, which is the easier thing to do than to find a left tackle. But the Cowboys have been pretty stubborn about this, and I think they have a reason for saying that, and I wondered if you have an idea about what that might be.
Yeah, I think that they look at Tyler Guyton as a raw guy, right? And especially, like, I think you kind of go back to last year. This is a guy that came out of the draft. He had 14 starts at right tackle, in his college career, right? And that's not a lot. And he started off as a defensive lineman. And honestly, last year, I don't think that they were looking for him to start initially. I think if Mike McCarthy and everyone had their way, that Chuma Edoga would have been the day one starter, while Tyler Guyton got to learn things a little bit behind the scenes a little bit before he was thrown in the fire. That didn't happen. So with Tyler Guyton right now, he understands that last year was a disappointment. He's talked about it too. I want to be someone who's dependent on, he said, and I could not be dependent on last year. So this year he's changed his diet. He's doing stretching an hour a day every single day in his hot garage. He says, before they head out to Oxnard, he's doing all the right things. He's working with Tyron Smith specifically. He went to Tyron Smith camp. He worked with Tyron Smith at the Star. And so he got some insight specifically on how to punch better and kind of how to have confidence, which no one can replicate Tyron Smith's punch. But he did tell me that there is a chance that Tyler Guyton could get there into a little bit more extent without the same kind of violence to it. But Tyler Guyton, I think that they are putting a lot of trust in him. If you look at what's behind him, there's not much. They have Awesome Richards working out there at left tackle, behind him. They've had Nate Thomas, another pick from last year, kind of rotating it a little bit and being that security blanket. But the question I have, Kevin and Evan, is I'm wondering if things go really wrong with Tyler Guyton this year, right? If it all kind of does not go well, are they tempted to move Tyler Smith back out to left tackle? That's something that, they've kind of said, no, Tyler Smith is on a Hall of Fame track as a left guard. We see another Zach Martin. We want to keep him there. But I think, we know this, when holes start kind of happening in the boat during the season, you'll do anything to plug them. And I'm wondering if that eventually becomes a thing where they move Tyler Smith back out to left tackle as a temporary fix if Tyler Guyton can't go. He is the biggest X factor, I think, on this team. And they're putting a lot of trust in him, at least on the surface right now, with not a lot of people behind him.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think when you go out and you spend a high draft pick on another offensive lineman, a guard, and it's going to replace Zach Martin this year, so you got the opportunity there. There were several candidates that are already in house to replace him. It seems easy enough to me to say, look, we know we like Tyler Smith at the left guard, but he was also a good left tackle. There's no question about that. And look, if it was good enough for Larry Allen to move around, right? He's playing guard and tackle, the greatest offensive lineman in Cowboys history. And he played, I think he ended up playing more guard than tackle, but he played both and was very good at both. If that's what you got to do, then that's what you got to do. I mean, you got to get your best players on the field, right?
Yeah. And if you kind of look at what the Cowboys have in-house right now, you brought it up, Kevin, their depth is in the interior offensive line. They thought Brock Hoffman did a solid job last year at right guard. And he's a guy that can play all three, all guard positions in center. They like TJ Bass as someone who can step in and kind of, handle things for a little while too. Awesome Richards actually, I think, likes playing guard more than he likes tackle. So, on the surface, they say, hey, Tyler Smith, that's our left guard, right? Kind of their actions in the free agent signings they had were also more interior guys. Their actions kind of tell you that this is someone, that they have more confidence in what they can do at guard and not instead of tackle. I wouldn't be surprised if things went wrong, if Tyler Smith had a chance at left tackle. Yeah,
I think that they certainly need to get that straightened out because their inability to run the ball has just killed them. It is negated the play action, which is when Dak is at his best, is under play action passes and so
you'll notice I sat out the offensive line segment of the podcast.
The broadcast or podcast?
Because I don't understand offensive line play.
Yeah. These guys, they have to block, or else they can't run.
Well, that part I get. I get the big guys blocking, but I don't get the intricate. It's like my biggest regret in sports journalism is I don't get the intricacies of offensive line play.
I've got a lot more regrets for you than just that. But anyway, that's going to do it for the Cowboys segment of our podcast. And Joe, it's been great having you on. We look forward to having you on more often. Look forward to reading your stuff in the paper. It's always good, and it's going to be exciting for us as a sports section.
Kevin, I do. Before we let Joe go, I am just going to say this: that you mentioned that Joe had a nice story about Dak Prescott and the receivers. But he did make his return to the morning news, I think, in a more traditional fashion, writing about Kevontae Turpin being arrested. And so I think that is kind of that is usually, right, how somebody makes their debut on the Cowboys is writing about somebody being arrested.
Yeah, especially after 4th of July weekend, too, when I'm already driving up from Galveston and I get the tip that it's happening. So I got to pull over and look into it. It's just classic back to the morning news behavior there.
Yeah, it is. Kevontae Turpin, it's not probably the worst thing he's been arrested for a marijuana possession and also, I guess, a firearm. but it is kind of just one thing after another with Cavante. This is one of the reasons why he wasn't drafted, and this is why he got in trouble at TCU, and he just can't stay out of trouble. He's an electrifying player on the field, but he just can't stay out of trouble. But as you said, Evan, we're used to this kind of stuff with the Cowboys. This is small potatoes with them. All right, that's going to do it for our podcast this week. We appreciate you taking the time. We could have talked a little bit about Cooper Flagg making his debut in the Summer League, but we're going to talk about that next week when we actually see some of that. But that's going to be exciting for Mavericks fans in the market. So from everybody
we
in
have no
here,
potpourri this week, Kevin?
no potpourri. No potpourri. We didn't have anything.
Can I mention the oddest thing I saw in sports this week?
I was trying to get out, but go right ahead.
I was watching Wimbledon over the weekend.
That was odd for you.
And there was a match between a Chilean and a British guy. And they showed the British guy's coach sitting on the sideline, or sitting in the stands, rather, wearing a TCU shirt.
Is that right?
Yeah, come to find out that Nori, I forget Nori's first name, he went to TCU, and I guess he gave his coach a TCU shirt.
How about that? A shout out.
Yeah, but then he lost Carlos Alcazar in the quarters, and that was the end of that run. So no TCU appearance in the Wimbledon finals this year.
Yeah, I don't think we were expecting that anyway, but that's okay. It was nice that
it was a nice run for Nori.
I got a nice shout out for the Frogs there. Okay, Evan, that was our potpourri for the week.
Finally, I got the potpourri segment. Yes,
there you go. You nailed it. Way to go. So, as I was trying to say a moment ago before I was so rudely interrupted, from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.